I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're getting our very first drive in Mazda's very first electric vehicle, the MX-30. It's been a long 18 months since we first saw the MX-30 together when this car was revealed at the Tokyo Motor Show before COVID, looking through the sands of time. But now it's here in Australia. If the background looks familiar, that's because we're at Lang Lang, where generations of Holdens were developed and tuned for the Australian market. But we're here today to thoroughly test what this EV is going to be like on local Australian roads. And there's no more honest or punishing space away from public roads than right here at Lang Lang. We can't drive them on the public road because these are still engineering pilot vehicles. I'm speaking to you in February. By the time you see this, it'll be a couple of months into the future, a couple of months closer to the MX-30 Electric's on sale date, which is expected to be in about the middle of the year. Well, in today's video, we're of course going to take the MX-30 for a drive, but before we do that, we'll have a look inside and in the boot to get a bit of a handle on what this EV SUV is going to be like to live with. But before we get started, make sure to hit subscribe down below the video. Now, this is our third time having a look at the interior of the new Mazda MX-30, and not a lot has changed apart from the relocation of the steering wheel to the correct side here. But the basic materials, colors, and layout of this SUV are all the same as when we first saw this car unveiled to the world. And unlike other Mazda interiors, this one really puts sustainable materials at the top of the priority list. So we've got things like cork finishing down here between the seats. That's both sustainable because a cork tree can live for 200 years, and also a marker of Mazda's heritage as a cork manufacturer 101 years ago. I also love the way that the cup holders just flip up and down. Nice little bit of design there. But we also have recycled PET bottles here for the upper door trim. And we've got cloth and other sort of sustainable fake leather here on the seats as well. And on the whole, it just feels like quite a fashion forward, but also well made and attractive interior. The dash layout is on the whole pretty similar to what we've seen on the new CX-30 and Mazda 3. So we've got the Mazda Connect screen up here. It's not a touch screen, there's a rotary dial to control it, but the software looks good, works pretty well. There's also wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And then in front of the driver, this being the electric version of the MX-30, we've got a distinctive instrument cluster. We've got a charge and power meter. We do in fact have a battery temperature gauge rather than coolant temperature, a traditional full empty gauge, and then a digital screen for your screen, kilometers left and percentage left in the battery as well. What's new for the MX-30 though is a digital climate control display down here. It is a touchscreen. We've got heated seats and heated steering wheel controls in there, fan and temperature. But unlike some annoying screens that you have to use to access climate functions in vehicles like the Skoda Kamiq, everything is at least on screen all the time. So while buttons are better, and we do in fact have buttons for fan and temperature as well, at least everything is there letting you choose from it. Now the seats themselves are quite supportive. As you can see, they've kept them thin so that we can have decent backseat space, and we'll have a look at that in just a moment. The driver's seat has full electric adjustment. Passenger seat is manual, but it does have height adjustment at least, which is good. And in terms of practicality, it's decent. We've got all this storage down here underneath this flying center console. We've got a box between the seats as well, sliding armrest, and decent sized door bins to cap it all off. But what is the back seat like on the MX-30? Accessed through these RX-8 style freestyle doors. Let's have a look now. Obviously, there's a bit of theatre to the way you get into the MX-30. Mazda have reached back into the greatest hits album with the RX-8 Coupe, which had these freestyle doors. Don't call them suicide doors, you'll get in trouble. But this is the way you get into the car. Clearly, it isn't designed to be as practical as a CX-30 because you could buy a CX-30. But here in the MX-30, we have still a decent sized back seat. It is platform buddies with the Mazda 3 and the CX-30, and you do get some of those benefits here in the second row. So for myself, headroom is acceptable at 6 foot. Legroom's good too. Tow room is okay. I mean, legroom is a little tight, but it's a small SUV at the end of the day. We do have a seat in the middle. It is a total perch, so you probably wouldn't want to use that too often. Instead, you can deploy the center armrest with two big cup holders. No air vents here in the second row, however. The view out is actually decent because we have this little split window here that you can see out of relatively easily, so you can carry passengers in a pinch, or of course you can use this space to extend the boot by dropping these seats. And speaking of the boot, that's what we're going to have a look at now. Moving around here to the back of the MX-30, you may notice that the dimensions are very similar to the CX-30 small SUV that Mazda also sell here in Australia. And that's because the pair fundamentally share the same platform. The platform was designed from the ground up to be capable of full electrification, ergo the MX-30, though you can also get the MX-30 with a 2-litre petrol, just like the CX-30, which kind of makes sense, kind of doesn't, but anyway. The other thing the two share from a design standpoint is the cladding. Now there's a bit less cladding on the MX-30, and on the whole, I do think this is a pretty good looking car. It's also fairly practical here in the boot, and it opens up to reveal 366 litres of space, which is quite decent for a small SUV. Goes back quite a long way. However, underneath the boot floor, you won't find a space saver spare or a full-size spare. Instead, you just get a tyre inflation kit. You also can't lower the back seats from here in the back, but you can lock the car remotely. As I mentioned, the tailgate itself is actually pretty light. Anyone will be able to open and close that. And now we've got that out of the way, let's go and take our first drive in the MX-30 Electric. So this is a pretty momentous occasion, our first time behind the wheel of Mazda's very first electric vehicle. And there's been a lot riding on this experience because throughout the entire development of the Mazda MX-30, the brand has been all about claiming that this vehicle was going to be first and foremost a Mazda dynamically. It wasn't about reinventing the brand and, you know, electrifying it and making it into something completely different. The MX-30 is supposed to be a Mazda, but with an electric powertrain instead of a combustion engine. And that might sound, you know, like a natural way to put it, and I suppose it is. But when you look at electric vehicles from some manufacturers, which bear really no relation to the characteristics of their combustion vehicles, you kind of see what Mazda is getting at. But I'll come back to the feel of the MX-30 in just a second. First of all, let's talk about the basics of what we're dealing with in the electric version of the MX-30. So we have quite a small battery, 35.5 kilowatt hour. 30 kilowatt hour is usable, so certainly not big, in the same kind of league as the Mini SE, less than a Hyundai Ioniq Electric, for example, and much less than vehicles like a Hyundai Kona Electric or Tesla Model 3. However, Mazda 100% back in that decision. It was very deliberate. This is a city-focused EV. That's what their senior executives say, and they say it would have made no sense to be lugging around large battery packs for a vehicle that is meant to be effectively confined to city environments that have decent charging infrastructure. We've got a single motor at the front end of the car producing 107 kilowatts of power and 271 newton meters of torque, transmitted to the front wheels only through a single speed gearbox. And that equates to a range for the MX-30 of 224 kilometers. And so it's not a long range vehicle. It's not something that's designed to be taken on ultra long distance trips across the Australian continent. Instead, it's a vehicle that Mazda suggests will remain confined to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Australia's city centres. Of course, now that charging infrastructure between our major cities here is getting better, road trips are looking more and more possible. But the MX-30 can only DC fast charge at a theoretical 50 kilowatts, and overseas reports are indicating that it's more capable of the high 30 range, so it's not a vehicle that can recharge as quickly as some rivals either. But because that battery is so modest, recharging it in your garage is actually a lot faster than some rivals, and so it's designed to be easy to live with, kind of in that regard. So those are all the bona fides of the MX-30. Mazda are happy to stand behind this as a short-range EV that keeps the vehicle nice and light. And that gives you a clue as to how the MX-30 drives, because they didn't call it MX by accident. There is an attempt to associate it with the MX-5, absolutely, which is a vehicle that's all about modest weight. Now, while the MX-5 weighs about 1,000 kilograms and the MX-30 weighs just over 1,600 kilos, the association of the two cars is theoretical. However, with some EVs in the market weighing in at more than 2 tons, the MX-30 naturally feels quite a bit more agile and sprightly. Not quite as sprightly as the Mini SE, which is remarkably light, but it's certainly closer to the way a Mini SE goes around corners than a Tesla Model 3, for example. And the ride and handling of the MX-30 is characteristic Mazda. It turns into corners really crisply. You just know exactly where the chassis is. It's really nicely balanced. The steering is communicative, and it's easy to play with the balance of the car mid-corner as well. Plus, the ride has that classic Mazda mix of firmness while still providing some cosseting insulation from the road. And in fact, I actually think the ride of the MX-30 is a little bit better than the CX-30, with which it shares a platform and other bits and bobs. I think you'd even go as far as to say that this EV is actually pretty fun to drive. It's really four-square on the road, the view out's really good, you sit low in the car, and of course the center of gravity is low in the electric version of the MX-30, which is where all of the batteries are down below us. In terms of speed, it isn't designed to be that fast, but because all of the 271 Newton meters of torque is available instantaneously, it certainly feels quicker than the numbers suggest. And there's no true gearbox, so everything is available instantaneously, and that's very much the effect you get in the car. However, Mazda have also done one or two interesting things to help you engage with this and help make the step from a combustion vehicle to an electric vehicle a little bit more natural. So it makes a sound. If I put my foot down, not only does the horizon rush at us quite a bit faster than before, but also you do get this kind of funny, deep, bassy noise. It is artificial. It's not actually the noise of the motors working or anything like that, but it just lets you know that your foot is pressed hard against the accelerator, and the volume does depend on how much pressure you're putting through the accelerator in this car, and I think that's quite cool. Mazda also point to features like the physical gear selector, which resembles that of a combustion vehicle, as things that are just designed to make this less of a sort of experimental feeling car and more like something that you would naturally jump into as your first EV. And of course, you can let me know down below in the comments whether or not you support that view. Adding to the mix is the fact that the MX-30 has really weak regenerative braking. If I lift my foot from the throttle, we just glide down through 70, 60, 55. Now you can alter that with the paddle here, which does induce stronger regen, but it's never enough to let the MX-30 actually come to a complete stop on regenerative braking alone. That's quite different to the way that Tesla do it, for example, and that's another thing that you can let me know whether you would prefer the MX-30 behaved in a different manner. Now, refinement is also quite good. That's important for a car that doesn't have any real powertrain noise to it. Road noise is pretty well insulated. Wind noise is quiet as well, and there's an almost total lack of vibration and harshness in this car. And safety is impressive too. We've got radar cruise control with stop and go. We've got lane centering, blind spot monitoring, a 360-degree camera, and reversing AEB. So it's all good from that point of view as well, particularly because at the moment the plan is to only sell the MX-30 Electric in a single grade in Australia with all of those features included. So that's my detailed first impression of the new Mazda MX-30 Electric. I think this is a really interesting addition to the EV landscape here in Australia. Of course, a lot of it's going to come down to price. This vehicle doesn't have a finalised price tag yet, but we do know everything else about it. We know it's an unashamedly short-range EV. That means Mazda have been able to keep it light, keep it agile. It is fun to drive. It looks good in my opinion, and I really like that interior. Of course, the next question is whether this recipe will appeal to buyers here in Australia. What do you think? Leave me a comment down below whether you think this MX-30 is a good fit in our market, or if there are other electric vehicles you want to see here in Australia as well. While you're down there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.